what financial incentive do they have to really make this shift and make this change? Or is it just because, out of the goodness of their heart?
My view is this: look, we're not trying to boil the ocean here, and we don't need everyone, right? And we certainly don't need everyone right now to make things happen. So if you help people to see things differently, and there are people that want to now affect the problem by utilizing their supply chain to do it, let's help them to do so, right? Because the first question they're going to ask is, where are these businesses you keep telling me about? Because I don't know where they are, right? The second thing that we know is going to happen is that we're dealing with confirmation bias, right? So we're expecting our businesses to mess up. And even if they mess up through normal course of business that happens to anybody, it's confirmation of what we think, right? So we've got to be able to identify the businesses for people who are interested in exploring this new path, right? And make sure that we wrap the support services around them, because you can get the contract of your dream and go bankrupt, right? Because you got to deploy capital long before you get paid for it, right? You got to hire people, offices, you know the whole thing associated with that, right? And we got to make sure that those folks have access to those resources to be able to deliver on those. The other thing that I think that we need to do is we need to give our consumers, Black, white, and otherwise, because a PhD is certainly a massive benefit to our community, but anybody can do it, right? And my thing is, that's the primary way that you should execute your resources, is in ways that create jobs and businesses in our community. It is to say, look, we need to give people the nomenclature to say, to what extent do you have your PhD? Are we being reflected in your supply chain? Are we being reflected in your payroll? Are you providing capital into our communities that's facilitating all of this, right? And right now, we're not really asking for it. And we're not giving people indications that this thing is important to us, right? The second thing I think is really important from a business standpoint is that there's more business to be made if they have customers that are better capitalized, if they have customers that have jobs, if they have customers that have a greater demand for services. The more money you get, the more stuff you want, right? Whether or not you should have it, right? So I think people can get and understand that, but they certainly react strongly to what consumers are requesting and demanding. The other thing to me is PhD is universal, right? This applies to everything and everyone. So when your politician comes up to you and says, hey, I really want your vote, I think you should say, hey, I really want to vote for you, but what's your plan for PhD? What's your plan to create jobs and businesses and provide capital in our community specifically, right? Well, I don't have a plan for PhD. Okay, well, we'll help you create one, right? Because I would love to vote for you, right? Help me help you. And the best way you can do that is by creating jobs and businesses, right? And providing capital in our community. Let's make that part of the expectation in terms of what we, are doing. And very often it tends to not be, right? Even when we do infrastructure development, we build an $800 million facility in our communities. Phenomenal. Who's laying the carpet? Who's doing the wiring? Who's doing like the IT? Who are the architects, right? Who's doing all the transportation services associated with it? Very often we're not in the supply chain of any of those things. So we're not creating jobs. We're not providing earned income, right? We're not helping people to have retained income, right? That they can spend and invest and so on and so forth. So a lot of the potential is stunted because we're not deploying capital and resources in a way that's consistent with PhD. If we say it's important, people will start to do it. Not necessarily because they love us, right? But because I think people do things because they see it as good for business or bad for business. And I'm saying you don't have, right? It's just one way or it's one or the other, right? It's advantageous for you to do it one way or the other.
No, I love that, and it shows the power of using power, I guess, in terms of, turning something from potential energy into kinetic energy. As we're both engineers by training. I think, that's what we, definitely need to do in terms of forcing these companies, enforcing our community, not even forcing, influencing. I think that's the better word in terms of, making sure that, everyone knows it's in their best interest to, have stronger Black businesses.